right. Welcome to this first in a series of videos on how to fatten up your snare. Now, I don't often do mixing tutorials because I'm not that great at mixing, but I've struggled a lot with this sort of size and fatness of my snare for a very long time, and I've learned a lot of things about how to get a much fatter sounding snare over time. So I've decided to put together a series of tutorials just on the topic of a fatter snare, and none of these videos are going to have anything to do with EQ or compression. Those are things you should use on the snare, but that's not what this series is going to be about. This is going to be some more esoteric, outside the box things you can do to fatten your snare that will really help with the overall tone. So the first thing I want to ask you to do is to be sure to like this video and subscribe so that you'll get notified when the other videos of the series start playing. The second thing I want to do is talk about what we're going to learn today in this video. And in this video, we're going to learn how to add the right amount of reverb every time to your snare to make it sound fatter. So let me just get I'm using just the Reason Studio drummer, so I have to be sure I started at the right point to trigger it. It's got decent samples. It's not the greatest drum sound, but it works for this. So let's take a listen. What I'll do is when we first heard it, the reverb was on. We'll listen to it with the reverb off and then with the reverb on, and then we'll talk about how you can get it perfect every time. So starting with it off. Off. Okay. So we're going to solo this snare now. This might even be a touch too much, but I want to make it so you can hear it. Okay, so what you can see is that this technique really fills up the space that the snare takes up without getting in the way of the snare's attack. It just makes the snare take up a bit more space, which is often what you want if you want a fatter snare drum. Now, not always. Sometimes you can use the gate to actually make a snare take up less space. But on a lot of songs, I found that I want just a little bit more drum without it getting muddy. And I learned this technique, and it was buried in the middle of somebody else's video, and I honestly, if I knew who it was, I would say right now, but I just can't remember. But I wanted to share this with you because I've been using this for a little bit, and I've really been enjoying it. So how do you get started with this? Well, the first thing you want to do is we'll bypass this reverb, and we'll just do a new reverb from start. So load up an RV7000, and you're going to want to go with a dense patch, something like a drum room or a small room, something like that. But we'll just do small room here. And you'll want to start with the wet, dry, fully wet. So you click on the remote panel to get this second section to come up. We'll turn bypass off. I just had that on earlier. So let's listen to the snare. I'll turn it up a bit. Okay, so what you're trying to do is get it so that the reverb tail lasts almost until the next snare hit comes. If it bleeds over to the next one, you've gone too far. So let's go adjust the decay knob here to get that to happen. That's too much, right? Yeah. That's about right there. And then the next thing you want to listen for is sometimes when you have when the reverb's just not working for you, it'll start to sound a little grainy. So you might want to adjust the room size, which kind of messes with how the algorithm works. So the graininess goes away. I'll turn it all the way up. It's basically when the reverb is just not operating optimally. So we'll turn it up and then we'll dial it in. You hear that? Also when it's too small, unnaturally small. That's actually pretty good. Diffusion can make it sound more live or less live. With this, more diffusion is sounding good. And then the next thing we want to do is add a little bit of, well, there's already early reflection on this one, which is good. A bit of pre-delay. And now let's pre-delay just lets the initial transienting of the attack come in first so that you don't get that squished out. And so you can dial it in a little bit. It's probably a little bit longer would be better. And the early reflections are sort of how loud the very first hit is, and it makes it sound like the room is, like the drums are closer to the reverb source, as is the microphone. So let's listen to this. And you want just enough reverb so that you can hear it. And then once you get to the point where you can hear the reverb, you want to turn it down, just like 2%. So let's, there you can really hear it. This is probably right. Let's turn on the mix. And now let's bypass it. Hear how dead that is? So there you have it. The simple technique for adding the right amount of reverb to your snare drum to really make it full and fat. If you enjoyed this, be sure to like and subscribe, and leave any comments if you've got some other good snare drum tips. On the next video, we're going to talk a little bit about saturation and how you can use that to make your drums sound fatter. Thanks.